Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to JCBN, Jamesport Christian Broadcast Network, and the Not One Stone podcast, and JCBN's Vlogcast. Now, you can catch our podcast on a good place to catch it's on our website at www.gojcbn.com, gojcbn.com. Go to our website and you can find it on the podcast page, or you can go to, we're hosting on several sites. We are on Podbean, we are on Amazon, on iHeartRadio, on Pandora, on several other sites that we go up to. And then we have our Vlogcast, which is our video, and our video's up on many sites also, Vimeo, Rumble, YouTube, Facebook, and Tumblr, Twitter, Twitcher, and many others. But anyway, our video, you'll see it there. And due to time constraints, our video is probably going to start being a little shorter than our audio. So if you want to get the more bulk of the lesson, you might want to go download it on audio where you're able to listen to it there. They started interrupting things on video, that longer video seems like it's catching up with the SEO and the words and so forth, and typing in their own time and megabytes and things like that. So anyway, but we're certainly glad you joined us here today. And this is going to be a study of the book of Revelation. Not Revelations, it's Revelation 1 there. And so we always want to be able to tell you that. Okay, when we study the book of Revelation, there's basic questions that we have to ask ourselves, and we're going to go ahead and do this. When was it written? We need to know when it was written. We need to know, number two, what's an approach that we need to take to Revelation, and what's it all about? What's the theme of it? What's it going to be about? And so, I believe the most important issue that confronts this, the interpreter of Revelation, is the date. We have to understand this date. Revelation helped to show me back in the early days when I was thinking that it was all fulfilled and Christ had come back in the old times. I thought about it when I was studying Revelation, and several other preachers told me the same thing. But because Revelation basically talks about the coming of Christ and all these things and the scenes that are in it, and being able to study it will show us basically how things happen. So it's been able to show me that. And so what I'm asking you to do before we start this lesson is to be able to pull your Bible out. Of course, if you're driving, you can't do that, but listen to these, and you can go back when you're home sometime and take out a pen and paper and write the verses down and so forth. But I'm asking you to have an open mind, to open the Bible, to learn it yourself, to study it, to show yourself approved, to see if these things are right or not. We've talked about that in many of our lessons there. So again, we go to the date of Revelation of when was this book written, because that's one of the most important issues that confronts the interpretation or the interpreter of Revelation, is that date. Okay, there's the late date, and that's AD 95 to 96. That would be in the futures camp. To all you futurists out there that believe Jesus is going to come back in the future, or these bodies that are buried in the ground are going to come back up and out of the graves and the flesh, and they're going to float in the air, all fleshier, and then change in the twinkling of an eye when they get up in the air, and there's going to be earthquakes, and then the ocean's going to give up dead people, and they're going to float up in the air, and all this stuff, and Christ is going to come back, and trumpets going to blow, and everybody in the whole world, every eye will see, every tongue will confess, every knee will bow, a big throne scene. If you believe all of that, you're going to believe in this AD 95 to 96 writing of this later date here to be a futurist, okay? Most do that. That's the current opinion through most all the Christians worldwide there, okay? And then there's the early date. The early date is AD 65 to 66. This is a date I agree with, and many others do also. This is called the early date, and it shows that Revelation there, if you read it, speaks about the birth pangs of the kingdom and the church, what's happening there, the beginning of church history, and so forth. And this date here, the earlier date, allows for us to understand that this is when Christ came back, and all this stuff that we talked about happened. And it views the book of the kingdom of church history, the kingdom, the old system, the old heaven, the old earth, the old ways that we studied in our other videos came to an end when Christ come there. So does Revelation speak then of a great tribulation that's going to bring worldwide chaos and 666? You think about that. Just for a second, I want to touch on that because you think, it's bad times, and it seems bad times all the time. It's just most of the time, and all these are worse than when I was a kid. They were better. Call that nostalgia. But time is real bad now, and there's going to be the mark of the beast, and this guy's out of office, and that guy's in. He's going to control this, and he's going to control that. They're going to plant 666 in our forehead. They're going to put numbers in us. They're going to do all these things. So this nation is just going down. Well, let me stop right there. If you go back through history, think about it. Just use your common sense and go back through history. Let's go back to 2000 BC, before Christ, in Egypt. What about Egypt? It was fat, it was flourishing, it was doing great. And then, through the centuries, through the years, it just goes down. And all the people about this point here, in the end of it, they go, this is so bad. These things are ending. Our country's going down. This is just such a horrible time, and this is the end of all things as we know it. It's just the end, didn't it? And then they kind of go out, and then something else develops, and then going down through history, and along comes Rome, and they grow up, and then they get fat. They're out there. I just use that metaphor there. They get fat, and then they start going down that funnel. After 300 or 400 or 500 years down there, and here goes our country. Everything's horrible now. We had control of all this part of the world, and we were the fiercest empire that ever lived with the biggest army that ever lived. And so now we're down to nothing, and then they're out of existence, And then come several others, the Ming Dynasty, a lot of other big continents and countries and empires and so forth come through. And now we're in the United States after 250 years just about, and we're fattening up here, and seems like they're going down for us too, But I believe after a long time, I don't know how long it'll be, but it will go out. There'll be something else come along, and something else will get fat and so forth. Just go through your history, use your common sense, and think about that. That's just common sense of all these. Go through and look at some history cards of these great continents and these great countries and these great empires that were before, and they're just going to continue to go on. This world goes on, the kingdom will have an end to it, and we'll get into that. But just think about that there as we talk about that. But, these futurists think everything's going to burn up and all these elements are going to melt and so forth, and they're using Revelation as the mark of the beast and all these dragons and these great pictures they get in their minds and so forth when they read this thing or when they study it, basically. But we have to ask ourselves, is that what it really does? Is that what's really going to happen, or did it inform? Did it really tell? Did Revelation tell the first century Christians of grave and trying times that they were facing, and that it would demonstrate that Christianity could weather the storms? They could get through these things and to get through these times. It's a very practical matter. It's a very subject that matters a whole lot. The late date comes exclusively from external evidence. It's based on statements that Irenaeus made in around 120 A.D. to around 200 A.D. there. And it's the only source that Revelation has for that late date, dating, and all other sources are based on him at the late date. There are other earlier writers whose statements indicate that John wrote Revelation a lot earlier. So again, I want to say that our safest course as we go through this study is to study Revelation itself to see what internal evidence, what's in the book, what's there that tells us, that presents the date in its writing, in John's writing. And so I believe in my studies, and I want to pass this along, that I believe the text of Revelation provides a self-witness for itself for the date in its writing. I want to begin by Revelation chapter 11, the verses 1 and 2. Chapter 11 of Revelation 1 and 2. We're going to see why we think that, I believe basically it provides self-witnessing for its written date. So it says there in 11, 1 and 2, "Then there was given to me a measuring rod like a staff, And someone said, "Get up and measure the temple of God and the altar and those who worship in it. Leave out the court which is outside the temple, and do not measure it, for it has been given to the nations, and they will tread underfoot the holy city for 42 months." Again, Revelation 11, verses 1 and 2. So these verses refer to a temple. Okay, you see here, standing in that holy city. And based upon Hebrew writings, we can summarize, of course, that a Christian Jew, or such as John, would have had a historical Jerusalem, that place where the temple was, in his mind, there in that vision when he spoke of the holy city. Okay, Isaiah 52 and 1, if you will. Isaiah 52 and 1 says, "Awake, awake, clothe yourself in your strength, O Zion, clothe yourself in your beautiful garments, O Jerusalem, the holy city. For the uncircumcision, the unclean will no longer come into you." That's again Isaiah 52 and 1. Over in Nehemiah chapter 11 and the verse 1 says, "Now the leaders of the people lived in Jerusalem, but the rest of the people cast lots to bring one out of 10 to live in Jerusalem, in the holy city, while 9/10 remained in the other cities." So also Revelation chapter 11 that we were in over there in the verse 8 talks about the city. It says, "And their dead bodies will lie in the street of the great city, which mystically is called Sodom in Egypt, where also their Lord was crucified." Now this city that he's talking about here is where the Lord was crucified on the cross. So it can only be the historical Jerusalem that he's talking about here. Well, what temple stood in Jerusalem there? Well, that was Herod's temple, right? Which he came to great power in around the 37 BC there, and determined that it would please the Jewish leaders if he'd go in there and create this great temple, and this great temple with all its kingly great qualities, by making it bigger, better than it ever had been. So I believe this reference to the temple has to be historical structure there that was in Jerusalem for a few reasons, okay? It was located in Jerusalem, first of all, was it not? And according to this Revelation 11 and 2 over there, it was under attack for 42 months. Nero, we know, commissioned Flavian Vespasian, that was a Roman general, to go to war in February of AD 67. He actually entered the Promised Land and engaged in a battle at Sprang, so the Jewish war with Rome lasted, we know, from the spring of AD 67 until the temple fell there in AD 70. All right, think about that. 42 months later, we look at Luke chapter 21 and the verse 20. And that contains Jesus' prophecy regarding the destruction. Let's look over there at that. Luke 21 and verse 20. Okay. All right, over there says, "But when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then recognize that her desolation is near." So the time from Revelation 11 that we looked at here fits with what history tells us about the Jewish war. And finally, the structure, as you go through the Revelation there, 11, 1 and 2 that we looked at earlier there, it parallels with Jesus' statement in all of its discourse. That's found over in Luke 21, 20 through 24. In Luke 21, 5 through 7, the disciples point to the temple. You remember that? And ask, what about this? What's going to happen to the temple? So they ask about that, and Jesus tells them, well, it's going to be destroyed. There's our podcast, one stone going to be left on another, and that's not going to be thrown down. And what did he else tell? There's going to be some still living here when that happens. That's what he tells them, right? Stone by stone. In Luke 21, 24, he speaks in terms that echoes there in Revelation 11 and 12. These two passages, you lay them side by side, they speak the same event. They talk about the same thing, the destruction of that Jerusalem. Okay? All right, so when was Revelation written? When was it written? What date was it written? Is the late date really the correct view of all these futurists down here? Is it a correct view? Well, we know from historical and archaeological evidence that the temple was destroyed in AD 70. That's when Jesus said it was going to be destroyed. That's when it was destroyed. If this temple was still standing when John wrote, okay, he must have written before AD 70, if it's still standing. All right, now you think about that. Revelation chapter 17 is the major piece of internal evidence for the early date view of Revelation. Now, in Revelation 17 there that we talk about, a vision of the seven-headed beast is recorded, and it gives us a lot of evidence that it was recorded before the death of Nero, Caesar, the Caesar Nero. We know by history that Nero committed suicide on June 9th, AD 68. June 9th, AD 68. All right, let's look at the Revelation 17, verses 1 through 6. Then one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls came and spoke with me, saying, Come here, I will show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth committed acts of immorality, and those who dwell on the earth were made drunk with the wine of her immorality. And he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, full of blasphemous names, having 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was clothed in purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, having in her hand a gold cup full of admonitions and of the unclean things of her immorality. And on her forehead a name was written, a mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of the admonitions of the earth. And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints, and with the blood of the witnesses of Jesus. When I saw her, I wondered greatly. Revelation 17, verses 1 through 6. Now, look at the verse 9 there. The verse 9 says, Here is the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. There's 7 mountains in there where this woman sits. Okay? Verses 1 and 3 and 6 of Revelation of chapter 17 describe that vision. And the verse 9 gives a clue to the meaning of that vision that he saw. Almost everybody that I look at, and the people that are the scholars recognize that the 7 mountains, there are 7 mountains there of Revelation 79 represents the 7 hills of Rome. John, he shows us, or he points out that the wise one will understand. So the recipients of the letter lived under the rule of Rome. And it was distinguished by those 7 hills. And that's the way I see it and study it. Now, how could the recipients of the letter who lived in the 7 historical churches of Asia Minor under the Roman rule understand anything except the geological things it's telling about those hills, those 7 hills? All right, Revelation 17:10, in the verse 10 there it says, And they are 7 kings, 5 have fallen, 1 is, the other has not yet come, and when he comes, he must remain a little while. So here we see that the 7 heads also represent a political situation. All right? There are 7 kings. We also see here the 7 heads correspond to those Caesars. All right? The Roman Caesars. 5 have fallen. That was before. That's past tense he's saying there. All right? Nero, the 6th Caesar, was on the throne when old John there was writing Revelation. And he reigned from, we know, as history tells us, October AD 54 until June AD 68, when he committed suicide because that empire then again went down. And as I was talking about earlier, it was in a civil war. So the other's not yet come here on this part here. And when he comes, it's going to remain a little while. So he's talking about this in the apocalyptic language here. And when he comes, in the future tense, he's saying here, when he comes, you see that? In the future tense, Galba, the 7th Caesar, reigned for less than 7 months when he was Caesar, June AD 68, January AD 69. Now in Revelation chapter 17 and the verse 7, the angel says, Why do you wonder? Why do you wonder? I'm going to tell you the mystery here. So in verses 9 and 10, the vision is explained there. The 7 heads refer to a historical place, Rome, and a political scene, what is Nero's reign. Okay, Revelation must have been written before Nero committed suicide in AD 68. So the internal evidence that we're looking at here points clearly, I believe, in my studies and what I've seen there, to the early date. Okay. So another question that we ask here is the key to understanding Revelations. What is approach? What does it mean? And what kind of approach do you take? So the historic view, the futurist view, and there's an idealist view, and there's a preterist view, or the one that, like me, that's fulfilled to believe Christ already came. So we see all these views here, okay? So in each view, whether it's a futurist view or an idealist view or a historical view or a preterist view, all these views, they provide a different interpretation of the whole book as you look at it. So, and I could go through all of those, but I want mainly deal here today with the futurists. These are prophecies that we talked about earlier happening. None of this has happened. It's going to happen later. And of course, those of us that have been believe in the fulfillment that Jesus Christ already came, are divided into a couple of camps. But we see that, in other words, a partial and then a full. But I believe that he did come at that time. But we have to understand and believe that in the full sense that all the prophecies of Revelation have already been fulfilled. That's when you believe things were fulfilled at that time. So the Revelation events happened John's own day that we see here. So as I said, there's a lot of schools there, but I'm focusing there on the futurist and on the fulfilled view, that it's been fulfilled. Okay. Let's look over at Revelation chapter 1 and the verse 4. John, to the 7 churches that are in Asia, grace to you and peace from him who is and who was and who's to come, and from the 7 spirits who are before his throne. Okay, so he names those churches. He names them, as we'd see in Revelation 1 and 11, right? In the book, what you see, and send it to the 7 churches, 7 literal churches, in Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, and, Philadelphia and Laodicea, okay? That's in Revelation 1 and 11 there. So John was not writing to just something that was not really there, just some mystic thing, right? He was writing to historical churches. And as I said in previous lessons, they're not there today, but he was writing to them then there. So we see that he was writing to them. And also John wrote to these churches back then in order for them to understand. He fully wanted his work, intended that his work there be revealing. In other words, apocalypsis, that means to uncover or disclose something. So he didn't write to cover truth up. He didn't write to hide it somewhere. No, he wanted to be, it was supposed to be revealed. Revelation 1:3 tells us that he expected his audience, okay, to hear and understand that these principles that were fixing to happen, that were soon going to happen. And he's talking about, he talks to all these 7 churches that were literal at that time. And he says, look, if you have an ear, who has an ear, let him hear. Same thing I'm trying to tell you today. If you have an ear, you better hear what the Spirit says, okay? And he says, hear what the Spirit says to those 7 churches. And finally, in Revelation chapter 1 to the verse 9, John said, I, John, your brother and fellow partaker in the tribulation and kingdom and perseverance, which are in Jesus, was on the island called Patmos, because of the word of God and the testimony of Jesus. That's the verse, chapter 1 to the verse 9. So John was a companion with his audience in the tribulation. John and the 7 churches are all in the tribulation together. They were all in that time and the things that were going out, so people would know that, and he writes to them. So Revelation's futurists, I guess they would be all their contemporaries together. The audience, they wouldn't look at the audience relevance of this, okay? But anyway, if I were you, I would look at the audience relevance of this, and I would use it in knowing that it's been fulfilled in Revelation. Revelation 1:1, John specifically states there what? These things are going to take place, fixing to take place real soon, at hand. There it is, time. I mean, come on, that's what he's talking about there. Because he said there, revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave him to show his bondservants the things which must soon take place. Some verses say shortly come to pass. He sent and signified it by his angel to his bondservant John, okay? Well, he communicated it to John, and the New American Standard Bible says that. So he emphasizes truth in a variety of ways through language, through different kind of language, okay? So there was no confusion. It was all clear, okay? And the Greek word there, as I talked about, translated soon, Revelation 1:1, from the Greek word tachos, T-A-C-H-O-S. And according to that lexicon, it's to mean speed, quickness, swiftness, without haste, okay, quickly. He uses the same word in Revelation 2 and 16, Revelation chapter 3 and verse 11, Revelation 22 and verse 6, and so on. So he uses that same Greek word there, quickly, fast, okay? Over there in Revelation 1:3 now he says, blessed he who reads those and hears the words of this prophet, heeds those things which are written in it, for the time is near. Now, he's writing to them, and so when they got that letter there, they sing that time's near. What would you think if you were in the church there at Philadelphia, Ephesus, wherever, and he says, look, the time's at hand, the time's near. It's, the things are fixing to happen, and they're fixing to kick off, okay? You got to look at that audience relevance. You got to look at that. I just can't stress it enough through this, okay? And also that word there, and the third Greek word he uses is mello, M-E-L-L-O. And it means, as I said last time, about to, fixing to. It's about to happen. There in Revelation chapter 1 and the verse 19, mello is used. In Revelation chapter 3 and the verse number 10. So he's telling him there, also in the chapter 1 of the verse 19, write these things that you see, that you've seen, and the things which are, and the things which will take place after these things. Okay, so if you look at that verse there, the phrase, the things which will take place after these things, is literal. It's literally what? I mean, if you look at it, the things which are about to occur here now, what things are fixing to happen. Okay, and in chapter 3 and the verse 10 over there, which shall come upon the whole world, is literally is about to come up. It's fixing to come up. It's going to, you've heard comedians say, I'm going to rock your world. It's fixing to rock your world. Okay, yeah, I guess they could come out and put little dots and say, I'm going to rock your part of the world. He says he's going to rock their world there in Jerusalem. Okay, at that time. So if you apply those principles, as we talked about last time, of audience relevance, in the original readers, and what would they see when they saw that in those literal churches? What would they think? It's about to happen. Things are getting ready to happen. It's getting ready to go. Well, it wouldn't mean thousands and millions of years in the future for them. It's fixing to happen for them, okay? And I know a lot of people, you're going to talk to people, that's false doctrine. They're going to tell you these things because they haven't studied, and they're going to try to redefine these terms to fit their ideology, to fit their paradigm. They try to arrange it that way, and it just doesn't work, guys, if you study it yourself. So the idea here is not that the event may happen soon, might happen soon, but that when it does, here's the idea, it's going to be sudden. It's going to be fast. It's going to be there when it happens. This is what it's trying to say here. So need to think about those things. And he said he was going to come quickly, Christ did at those times. In a couple thousand years, no. He's going to come back at that time. Come quickly. Okay. So we have to understand how the author uses the definition of tachos there in Philippians when he talks in Philippians 2 and 19. But I hope in the Lord Jesus to send Timothy to you shortly, he says, so that I also may be encouraged when I learn of your condition. So why did he use that same word there he's using Revelation? I'm going to send Timothy to you shortly. Shortly. Timothy still isn't there yet. What do y'all think? Well, to the futurists, I guess Timothy's not there yet because that's the same word that's used over there in Revelation. So where's he at, guys? Did he get lost? No, he came to them, as it says, Philippians 2:19, shortly. And this came upon them shortly, quickly. Same words. So that doesn't mean whenever he came to them. It meant when he was going to be there. He's going to come to them, and he did. All right, well, that's going to be my lesson today. I appreciate you listening to JCBN, Jamesport Christian Broadcast Network, and to our One Stone podcast. I hope you listen in to this study of Revelation. In fact, I hope you study it with us. And I want you to open your Bibles, and I want you to get in and dig in and deeply study that yourself, and not count on somebody else that may lead you astray. That so many of us were led for so long and been on that path. And find the truth. When you find the truth, you'll see it. And when you see it, you can't unsee it. That's the end of my message today. And I certainly appreciate your time. And I hope that God blesses you in your studies. And I hope God will bless us through the study of Revelation. Until next time, I hope you have a good week ahead.